My daughter left us on the ice to die, and the last thing I heard before the cold swallowed everything was my wife whispering 3 words into my ear that changed everything. Don't move yet. I am Hugh Mercer. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the city of Edmonton, designing drainage systems and utility corridors that still run under half the neighborhoods in this city. I know how things are built. I know how things are built. I know how they fail, and I know better than most that the cracks that destroy a structure are never the ones you can see from the outside. They hide in the joints. They hide in the places where 2 things meet and pretend to hold. Until 4 days ago, I believed my family was solid. I believed we were the kind of family other people looked at and felt a small, quiet envy toward. A home in Sherwood Park paid off. A retirement my wife Irene and I had built together over 40 years of careful, boring, deliberate saving. A daughter we had loved so completely that we had given her everything we had, including the things we couldn't afford. I was wrong about all of it. This is what happened. Every winter, for the past 11 years, Irene and I have driven up to a property I own near Lac La Biche. It's a simple place. A cabin I built myself over 3 summers in my 40s, cedar frame, propane heat, a wood stove that Irene always said made the whole place smell like a ski lodge. We go in January, after the holidays settle down, when the lake freezes solid and the world gets quiet, and there's nothing to do but read and drink coffee and remember why we married each other. This past January, our daughter asked if she and her husband could join us. I want to be honest about something. I did not want them to come. Not because I don't love my daughter. I do. I've loved her since the second she was born. A red, furious little thing who screamed so loud, the nurses laughed. Her name is Corinne. She is 34 years old. She has her mother's dark hair and my stubbornness, and, as I have recently learned, neither of our hearts. The reason I didn't want them to come is that things had been strained. Her husband, Beau, had been asking me about money, not directly. Beau doesn't do anything directly. He does it sideways, casually, the way a person brushes lint off your jacket while quietly checking the weight of your wallet. Over the past year, he had mentioned twice that their mortgage renewal was going to be brutal with the rates. He had mentioned that his contracting business was going through a slow patch. He had mentioned very offhandedly at our Thanksgiving dinner in October that he had heard reverse mortgages weren't as bad as people thought. I had smiled and changed the subject each time. But Irene said yes before I could say anything, and I did not argue with her because Irene is almost always right about these things, and because some part of me wanted to believe that a few days in the quiet of the lake would fix whatever had gone crooked between us and our daughter. We drove up on a Thursday. The highway was clear, the sky was that particular shade of Alberta blue that only happens in January, so cold and sharp it almost looks fake. Irene sat beside me with a thermos of tea and her audiobook, and for 2.5 hours I almost forgot that anything was wrong. Corinne and Beau arrived the next morning in Beau's truck, which was new and expensive and which I had not been told about. They came in laughing and loud, carrying wine they didn't need to bring, and making big noises about how beautiful the property was. And Irene hugged Corinne for a long time, and I shook Beau's hand, and everything looked, on the surface, the way a family weekend is supposed to look. It was Irene who noticed it first. That evening, after dinner, while Beau was loading the wood stove and Corinne was washing dishes, Irene touched my elbow and tilted her head toward the window. I looked. Beau's truck was parked beside mine. His phone was in his hand. He was not checking messages. He was photographing something. He was photographing the outbuilding, the one where I keep the ATV and the fishing gear, and on a shelf in the back corner behind a stack of old snowshoe frames, a fireproof lockbox with the cabin's deed, and a copy of our insurance policies. I did not say anything to Irene. Not then. The next morning was Saturday. The plan was to spend the afternoon on the lake. Beau had suggested it, actually, with an enthusiasm that I now understand was engineered. He wanted to see the ice fishing spots, he said. He had always wanted to try ice fishing, He had that quality some men have of performing interest in things they've researched carefully for other reasons. We bundled up and went out. The lake was frozen solid, as it always is in January up there. 3 feet of ice under your feet, the kind of solid you stop thinking about after a few winters. We walked maybe 400 meters from shore to the spot where I have fished every year for over a decade. I was carrying the auger. Irene had the thermos. Corinne and Beau were walking behind us. I heard the ice shift once, a low groan that runs through you rather than past you. That's normal. Ice talks. I've heard it 1,000 times. I did not stop walking. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. I felt both hands on my back. Not a stumble, not a bump. Hands. Flat against my shoulder blades. Deliberate and hard. I went forward. The auger flew out of my grip. The ice at the edge of the fishing hole was not natural. I understood that in the millisecond before I hit it, the hole was already open. Someone had opened it before we got there. I went into the water up to my chest before I caught the edge with my left forearm, screaming without sound, the cold so absolute it was indistinguishable from pain. Irene was beside me in an instant. She grabbed my arm. She was screaming my name. Together we dragged my body back onto the ice, and I lay there gasping, my lungs refusing to fill, the cold wrapping around my rib cage like a fist. And then I heard them. They were standing 10, maybe 50 meters behind us, not running toward us, not screaming for help. Standing. Beau had his phone out. I thought for a half-second that he was calling 911. Then I heard Corinne's voice, low and sharp and nothing like my daughter. He got out. I see that. Beau's voice was flat. Control. Can we? No, not with her right there. We wait. Irene had gone very still beside me. Her hand was on my chest, and she pressed it down slightly, the way she used to press my hand at church when she wanted me to stop fidgeting. Don't. A warning. Her eyes were wide and she was staring up at the white sky, and I could see her breath coming in fast, shallow clouds. Hugh, she said, barely moving her lips, don't call out to them. That's our daughter. I know who she is. Her voice broke on the last word in a way I had never heard before. I know exactly who she is. I have known for 3 months. Don't move. I want to tell you what it feels like to lie on ice with your chest soaked and the temperature at -22 and realize that the person who pushed you is the one you drove 2.5 hours to have coffee with. I cannot describe it. The cold was physical and complete, but it was nothing at all, compared to the thing that happened inside my chest in that moment. Irene was speaking barely above breathing. She had seen something on Corinne's phone 3 months ago, she told me. A message in a group chat that Corinne had left open on the kitchen counter at Thanksgiving. She had not told me because she had wanted to believe she had misread it. She had not told me because she is a mother, and there is a specific kind of grief that a mother carries when she begins to suspect the worst of her child, a grief that lives in the body like a stone and refuses to be named until it absolutely must be. What she had read was this: Beau writing to Corinne, a week before Thanksgiving. If the old man goes first, does she get everything automatically or does it go through probate? Get R to check. R was Corinne's friend Sabrina. Sabrina, who as it happened worked at an estate law office in the West End of Edmonton. They had been planning this, not for days, for months. We lay on that ice for 11 minutes. I know because I counted my own heartbeats and lost count twice and started again. Beau eventually said, loud enough to carry, I'm calling 911 right now. We need to get him inside. And that was when the performance began. They came running. Corinne was crying or making the sounds of crying. Beau was authoritative and calm, the helpful son-in-law managing a crisis, and they got us back to the cabin and Beau made calls, and Irene and I sat wrapped in blankets at the kitchen table and did not look at each other because we were both afraid of what our faces would give away. By the time the volunteer fire department arrived from the nearest town, we were two old people who had had a very frightening accident on the ice. That was the story. The paramedic who checked me over was a young woman named, I remember clearly, Donnie, who had a calm that seemed almost too large for her age. She told me my core temperature was low but not critical, that I needed to get warm and stay warm, that I was lucky I hadn't gone fully under. Lucky. I caught Irene's eye across the room. She looked at me for exactly 1 second and then looked away. We spent that night at the cabin. We had no choice. Bo offered to drive us back to Edmonton immediately, generously, in the way of a man who has already decided what he wants the story to sound like. I said I was too cold and shaken to travel. This was true. It was also useful. That night, while Bo and Corinne slept in the back bedroom, Irene and I sat up together in the front room with the wood stove going and the overhead light off, and she told me everything she had seen in that message thread, every word she could remember. There was more than the one message. There was a conversation. Corinne asking about the RRSP accounts, the TFSA, whether a life insurance payout would be taxable. Bo saying they needed to move before things got worse. Before what got worse? I asked. Irene didn't know. We sat with that question between us like something cold. What I did know was this. I was not going to walk out of that cabin and pretend nothing had happened, and I was not going to confront them without proof, without something solid under my feet. I am an engineer. I solve problems with information. I find the load-bearing structure, and I work from there. The lockbox. I slipped out of the front room at 2 in the morning, through the side door, across to the outbuilding in the dark. It was -28, and I was in my socks and a heavy wool sweater, and I did not care. The lockbox was where it always was. I opened it. Inside, along with the deed and the insurance papers, was a small voice-activated recorder I had placed there 3 months ago, after Bo's reverse mortgage comment at Thanksgiving. I had not told Irene. I had hoped it would record nothing worth listening to. I took it back to the cabin. I plugged it into my laptop at the kitchen table with the sound turned as low as it would go, and Irene beside me with her hand pressed over her mouth, and we listened. The recorder had picked up 2 conversations. The first was from Friday evening, while Irene and I had been cleaning up dinner. Bo and Corinne, in the outbuilding, speaking in the low, practical voices of people who have already made a decision and are only discussing logistics. Bo's voice, the haul is already done. I went out at 6 this morning. Corinne, and you're sure it'll hold long enough? Bo, there's a stress line that runs diagonal from the main channel. Right where he always sets up, he goes through. It looks like natural ice failure. It happens every year somewhere on this lake. I checked the incident reports. A pause. Corinne. And if, Mom? Bo, she can't swim. You told me that. I stopped the recording. I could not breathe. Not from the cold this time. From something else. I looked at Irene. She was not crying. Her face was completely still, the way a lake looks in the moment before the ice cracks. She said very quietly, "Play it again." We played it twice. Then I copied the file to an encrypted folder on my laptop and emailed it to myself and to an address that I will explain in a moment. Then I closed the laptop. We did not sleep. In the morning, we were 2 people who were frightened and grateful and still processing a terrible accident, and we played that part with everything we had. The email address. 32 years ago, in my first year at the city, I was assigned to work alongside a project manager named Stuart Webb, who was 15 years older than me and had no patience for people who confused effort with competence. He was the hardest man to impress I've ever met, and I spent the better part of 2 years trying to impress him, and somewhere in that time we became the kind of friends that don't require maintenance. Stuart retired years before I did. After his wife passed, He spent a year doing nothing and then enrolled in law school at 61 years old because he said he had enough years left to be useful in a new way, and he wanted them to count. He practices now in the city, family and estate law, and he is the only person I know who is more stubborn than I am and considerably meaner when provoked. I had emailed him the recording at 3:14 in the morning. By the time Corinne came out of the bedroom at 8 o'clock to make coffee, hair perfectly done, eyes clear, performing a daughter's version of the morning after a family crisis, Stuart had already listened to the file and replied with 4 words. Don't say a word. We drove back to Edmonton that afternoon, the 4 of us, with Beau at the wheel of his truck and Irene and I in the back seat. They were kind to us the entire drive. Corinne asked twice if I was warm enough. Beau stopped for coffee without being asked. The good brand, the kind he knew I liked. I looked out the window at the highway and the flat white fields and thought about the fact that my daughter had asked her husband to confirm my wife couldn't swim. Stuart met us at our house that evening after Corinne and Beau left. He sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and listened to us without interrupting for 40 minutes. Then he asked 4 very specific questions. Then he said, "Here is what we are going to do." I had expected him to say we should go to the police. He said that too, but not first. First, he said, we needed to understand what they were actually after, because the recording told us what they had done, but not the full shape of what they had turned. He was right, and what he found over the next 3 days working through a private investigator he trusted and through his own contacts at the Land Titles Office was worse than the ice. Beau's contracting business was in collections. He owed $430,000 across 3 separate creditors, including 2 that had already begun legal proceedings. He had remortgaged their own home 18 months ago to pay a debt that had since compounded. They were, in the plainest possible terms, 3 months from bankruptcy. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was the will. 18 months ago, Corinne had asked me to update our estate documents. She had been very gentle about it, very practical. She had said that she just wanted to make sure everything was in order, that she didn't want us to have to think about these things during an emergency. She had referred us to a lawyer. A colleague of Beau's, she said, someone efficient and affordable. We had gone. We had met with a man. His name was Preston, and he was pleasant and thorough, and we had walked out with a new will. What Stuart found when he pulled the documents was that the will we had signed was not the will we had been shown. 2 clauses had been altered between the draft we reviewed and the final we signed. The first removed a bequest to my nephew in Ontario, a young man with a disability who I had promised to take care of. The second added language that, in the event of simultaneous death or death within 30 days of each other, granted Beau personal authority over the estate administration rather than going to the public trustee. Preston was not a colleague of Beau's. Preston's incorporation was registered to an address that was also registered to a numbered company that Beau was a director of. They had reached into the most intimate document of our lives, and they had rewritten it. I sat in Stuart's office when he told me this, and I did not say anything for a long time. I am not a man who cries easily. I cried. I cried because I thought about my nephew, who had trusted me, and I cried because I thought about every Christmas dinner and every birthday and every time Corinne had hugged Irene and called her mom, and I understood finally and completely that it had all been calculated. Not the warmth, not the childhood. I need to be fair. I don't believe the child who loved us was performing. I believe something broke in my daughter somewhere along the way, broke quietly and in the wrong direction, and I did not see it, and that is a grief I will carry for the rest of my life. But the woman who asked her husband to check my wife couldn't swim. That woman I do not know. That woman I am not willing to protect. Stuart filed a report with the Edmonton Police Service on a Tuesday. By Thursday, a financial crimes investigator had been assigned. By the following Monday, Preston's law license was under review by the Law Society of Alberta, and Beau's numbered company was frozen pending a fraud investigation. We did not tell Corinne and Beau that we knew. Not yet. Stuart had a plan, and the plan required them to believe they were still in control. He arranged for Irene and me to meet with them at our home on the following Saturday morning under the pretext of updating our estate documents. He told us to say we had been shaken by the ice accident, that it had made us want to make sure everything was in order. He told us to be warm and a little vulnerable. He told Irene to make tea. Irene made Scottish shortbread as well because she said if she was going to play a part, she was going to play it fully. They arrived at 10 o'clock. Beau was wearing the jacket he always wore when he wanted to seem trustworthy. The dark green canvas one, the barn coat. Corinne hugged us both. She smelled like the perfume we had given her for her birthday. I held the hug for exactly as long as I would have before everything, because I did not want to give a single thing away. We sat down in the living room. Irene poured tea. I said I'd been thinking about the will and wanted to make some adjustments. Beau leaned forward in his chair with the alertness of a man who had been waiting for exactly this sentence. He said that was very wise, that he was glad we were thinking about these things, that he happened to know a good lawyer who could arrange everything quickly. He said the name, Preston. And that was when the door opened. Stuart had let himself in through the back. He walked into the living room carrying a document case, and he sat down in the chair beside the fireplace, and he looked at Beau with an expression I can only describe as geological, the look of something that has been patient long enough to turn into stone. "I'm Stuart Webb," he said. "I'm Hugh and Irene's legal counsel. I've been counsel for this family for the past 6 days, during which time we've had a very informative conversation with the Edmonton Police Service, the Law Society of Alberta, and a private investigator whose bill I'll be forwarding to your numbered company, which you'll soon have difficulty accessing." He set the document case on the coffee table and opened it. "I have a few things for you to look at." Corinne went pale. I watched it happen, the color leaving her face from the top down like a light going out. Beau tried. "I'll give him that." He tried the confident voice, the confusion performance, the "what is this about" tone that men like him use when they've been caught but haven't accepted it yet. He said there must be some misunderstanding. He said he wasn't sure what we thought we had heard on that ice. He said, "Come on, you know me." "I know you," I said. "I know exactly who you are." I reached into my pocket and set the recorder on the coffee table beside Stuart's document case. I'd pressed play. Beau's voice filled my living room, the part about the ice hole, the part about the stress line, the part where Corinne asked about her mother. I watched my daughter listen to her own voice come out of that small black recorder, and I watched something happen in her face that I cannot fully name. It was not the face of someone being caught in a lie. It was the face of someone hearing themselves from the outside for the first time and not recognizing the sound. She started crying before the recording ended. Beau stood up. He was still trying to find a version of this that worked. He said the recording was illegally obtained. Stuart said it wasn't, because in Alberta only one party to a conversation needs to consent to its recording, and the device was on property solely owned by me. He said the will alteration was a misunderstanding, a clerical error. Stuart said that was a very interesting theory, and he was welcome to present it to the Law Society investigator, who would be in touch Monday morning. He said Corinne had nothing to do with the financial matters. Corinne from the sofa said nothing. She was looking at her hands. Then Beau stopped talking. He stopped the way a machine stops when the power goes out, mid-motion, mid-thought, and just stood there in my living room in his trustworthy jacket, and I felt, for one precise second, pity for him. The kind of pity you feel for a person who has taken the worst possible exit from a hard situation and now has to live in the direction they've chosen. Then I thought about Irene's voice on the ice. "She can't swim. You told me that." And the pity was gone. The police arrived at 1 o'clock. Beau was escorted out. He did not look at me. Corinne did. At the door, just before the officer moved her toward the vehicle, she turned back and she looked at me with an expression I have turned over in my mind every day since. An expression that I cannot fully read, that had grief in it, and something that might have been shame. And she said, "Dad, I'm so sorry." I looked at her for a long moment. "I know," I said. That was all I said, because what is there to say? Because the truth is that I am sorry too. Sorry for whatever I missed, whatever bent her in the direction she went. Sorry for all the ways a child can drift and a parent can be too close to see it. Sorry that love is not, in the end, a structural guarantee. The fraud charges are working through the system. The will has been voided and replaced correctly by a new one. Stuart prepared himself, and which I watched him file with my own eyes. My nephew's bequest is restored. The estate administration goes to the public trustee in the event of our passing, with oversight from Stuart. Preston has been disbarred pending his hearing. 3 other families have come forward with similar complaints. Beau's business is in receivership. We sold the cabin. I did not want to sell it at first. I had built it with my hands, board by board, and some part of me wanted to believe that the place was still what it was before. But Irene was right. She usually is. She said the lake would always be the lake that tried to take us, and she was not going to spend another January there drinking coffee she couldn't taste. We sold it in March to a young couple from Fort Saskatchewan who wanted somewhere to take their kids on weekends. I hope they have good winters there. I hope the ice is kind to them. We are living now in the same house we have always lived in. But it is quieter. We have dinner most Sundays with my sister-in-law and her husband, and sometimes Stuart comes, and we eat well and talk about things that have nothing to do with any of this. My nephew is studying welding in Sudbury. He called last month to say he was doing well. That call was worth every hard thing. Corinne is awaiting trial. I have not spoken to her since the day she was walked out of my living room. I have thought about it. I have picked up the phone twice and put it down. I don't know what I would say. I don't know what version of her I would be calling. The daughter I raised or the person she became somewhere in the gap between those two things. Perhaps they are the same person, and I simply love one and cannot forgive the other yet. Perhaps forgiveness is something that comes later, when enough time is settled into the joints. I was an engineer for 31 years. I know that the things that hold do not hold because they are hard. They hold because they are designed to flex, because they account for movement and for force and for the things that will inevitably be asked of them. I did not design my family that way. I built it solid and expected it to stay solid. And that was my mistake. The lesson is not that love is not worth building. The lesson is that you have to pay attention to the joints. You have to look at the things you have been afraid to look at, and you have to look at them before the ice gives way. If you're listening to this, and you have a feeling in your chest that you have been refusing to name, I am asking you to name it, today. Not because it will be easy, because the longer you wait, the deeper the crack. My name is Hugh Mercer. I'm 68 years old. I'm still here, and so is Irene. And that, against everything, is enough. I have been lying on that ice in my mind every day since it happened, not because I cannot let it go, but because I think it is important to understand what you are actually looking at when you look back at something like this. It is easy to call it a betrayal and leave it there, but betrayal is just the event. What matters is the shape of the years that built it. Beau did not become the man who researched ice stress lines overnight. Corinne did not become someone who asked whether her mother could swim in a single conversation. These things grew. They grew in the silence I chose when I changed the subject to Thanksgiving. They grew in the small moments when I noticed something was off and told myself I was imagining it. I am not saying what happened was my fault. I am saying that the cracks were there, and I chose comfort over clarity, and that is something I have to sit with honestly. What saved us was not luck. I want to be clear about that. What saved us was that Irene had the courage to hold a piece of terrible knowledge in her body for 3 months without flinching, because she was waiting until she understood it fully before she spoke. That is a kind of moral steadiness I have always admired in her, and not always matched. She did not panic on that ice. She did not give us away. She thought, even with frozen water soaking through her coat, clearly and cleanly, and she made the right call. That is not instinct. That is character built over a lifetime of paying attention to what is actually true rather than what is comfortable. And Stuart, 32 years of friendship, and when I needed him at 3 in the morning, he was already reading what I sent him. The reason I trusted him with something that serious, the reason I had his number memorized and not just saved in my phone, is because I had spent decades showing up for him the same way. That is how it works. You do not find people like Stuart in a crisis. You build them slowly, through ordinary reliability, through being the kind of person who calls back and shows up and does not make promises he cannot keep. The network that protected us was made of years of small, decent choices. I think about my nephew in Sudbury, who trusted me to take care of him and almost lost that because I had not been careful enough with the documents that govern my own estate. I fixed it, but I should not have needed to fix it. I should have read every page myself. I should have asked harder questions. Being trusting is not a virtue when it means abdicating your own responsibility to look clearly at the things that matter. What I carry from all of this is not bitterness. Bitterness would be the easiest thing and also the most useless. What I carry is a clearer understanding that a decent life requires all three of these things working at once. The integrity to be honest about what you see, the intelligence to understand it properly before you act, and the backbone to do what needs doing even when it costs you something real. I had all three in different proportions at different times. Irene had them more evenly. That is why she whispered, "Don't move," and I listened. My daughter is awaiting trial. I do not know what happens next for her. I know what happened. Choices accumulating year after year, each one small enough to seem survivable, until one morning she was standing on a frozen lake in Alberta, watching her father go through the ice, and she did not run toward him. I hope she finds her way back to herself. I genuinely do. But hoping for her is no longer the same as waiting for her. Irene is outside right now, in the garden. She planted new things this spring. Things that will take years to come in properly. She is patient that way. She always has been. I am learning.